Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a good night. I am Patrick, your host here on Storytelling Imperfectly, and welcome to the channel. And if you're new to the channel, I am Patrick, and I hope you like what you see. Guys, the story I have for you today, like all my stories, is strange and it's weird and it makes you question what the heck happened. But this story particularly, all right, above all others, is super strange. I mean, it goes to levels of weirdness that most of my other stories don't go. It's unsolved now for 45 years. Holy smokes. And it goes all the way back to 1978. Stick around. I love hearing what you guys have to say about all my cases, but this one in particular, after you hear the facts of this, I would love to hear what you think happened to these poor guys. But anyway, let's get into today's story, the Yuba County 5, or the American Diablo Pass, or man, just call it weird. Now, as I just said, guys, the Yuba County 5, or the American Diablo Pass, this case has many, many names. But no matter what you call it, you can call it strange as heck, because it is inexplicable what happened to these 5 young men that we're going to talk about. Now, they go and range between the ages of 32 and 24. However, 4 of the men knew each other extremely well, as the one guy was kind of new to the group, but they had known him long enough, and they all participated on the same basketball team. And those guys were Jack Hewitt, who was 24 years old and the youngest of the group, and then Ted Weir, who was actually the oldest of the group at 32 years old. You had Will Sterling, who was reportedly very religious guy. I mean, he would go to the library and spend his time reading religious texts and philosophies on Christianity, as well as reading his Bible. I mean, at any given time, you could find William Sterling reading the Gospels, if you will. And he was 29 years old. Then you had Jack Madruga. And Jack was 30 years old, and he was actually only one of 2 of these guys that had a driver's license. So, and last of all was a guy named Gary Mathias, all right? Now, Gary Mathias was 25 years old. Now, something to be said about this, Gary Mathias was new to the group. You know how I said that there were 4 of the guys had known each other extremely well? Well, that was Jack Madruga and Jack Hewitt and Ted Weir and William Sterling. Those guys had pretty much grown up together and knew each other extremely well. Gary Mathias, on the other hand, was kind of an outsider. He had moved to this town where these guys were from, and you know, he although had similar backgrounds as them, just hadn't known the guys as long as the other 4 had known each other. But Gary and all the guys were on a basketball team together. But the other thing they shared in common is that they were, in varied forms, mentally disabled. But these guys had learning disabilities in varied forms. Jack Madruga had actually been in the Army, and he had been in the Army for a year and actually maintained the job as a truck driver. Hence why he was one of the guys that had a license. And but his whole reason of being discharged, because he had a low IQ. And I mean, when you have trouble taking orders or maintaining your job in the military, you know, he was discharged. Gary Mathias was also in the military, but he was discharged because he was diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic during his time of service. The other guys, though, like I said, you know, William Sterling was, you know, had very difficult time and spent most of his time, like I said, reading and doing all these things. And Jack Hewitt was actually known to be super shy. You know, like he wasn't a very outgoing person in life, you know, as far as getting out there and doing everything else. In fact, he had anxiety, and even Ted Weir, the oldest of the group at 32, really kind of took Jack Hewitt as a little brother, kind of took him under his wing. And Ted was even known to make phone calls for Jack. Like if Jack had to do some business and he was just so anxious and apprehensive about being on the telephone with strangers and doing that kind of business, Ted would make the calls for him and pretend to be him so he could arrange, you know, whatever needed to be arranged or fix whatever needed to be fixed. And that's just kind of what people said about Ted. Being the oldest of the group, is that he was kind of the voice of reason amongst them all. No matter what, I mean, they weren't so. I guess, like, again, they weren't so disabled guys to where they weren't functioning. Jack Madruga had his driver's license, which also leads me to Jack being kind of the wheelman of the group. And Jack had a Montego, a Mercury Montego. And that Montego was his baby. I mean, it was the thing that he was most proud of. It was the thing that he loved the most in the world. And he loved to drive it, and he was just super proud of his vehicle. He maintained it, I mean, mint condition type of maintained it. You know, he would just really love this car. And he would take the guys all the way around. You know, if they had basketball games and this, that, and the other, they would all do that. Now, that leads us up into this period in time. Let's get into the case. Now that we know who the case is about, let's get into the particulars of this case. And buckle up, guys, because it's kind of like there's so much information to this case that I'm just going to kind of stow it out there, and it's going to kind of like be drinking from a fire hydrant after they've opened it. You know, it's just going to, you know, with information. But it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. So these 5 guys, like I said, were on the same basketball team. And in fact, they were kind of like Special Olympics basketball team. And they loved it. You know, they loved playing sports, and they loved playing basketball together. And actually, it was basketball season. And these guys, and this isn't happening in California, by the way, guys. I think I left out where this is taking place. I get so excited about these cases and to bring them to you guys that I sometimes leave out some details that I needed to add in. So this is taking place in California. And in February, 1978, in February, these guys had a tournament coming up. I had a basketball tournament coming up. And they were so excited about it because not only do they love playing basketball, but at this particular event, this tournament that they were going to go and play against other guys and other teams, they were going to actually get to meet Sally Struthers. You know, I don't know if you guys know who Sally Struthers is. I'll put a picture of old Sally up. But she used to be all over the TV, guys. And at one point in time, she was a huge star. And this was, like, during this time, this was the height, really, of Sally's stardom, you know, 78. And so these guys were like, man, we get to meet Sally Struthers, you know, kind of think of it like, you know, you're going to get to meet Post Malone, you know, I mean, Lady Gaga. I don't know, pick somebody you like, you know, that's what it would have been like for these particular fellows. So they were super excited about that. But this was the next day. They had to go to this tournament the next day. But before they did that, they wanted to go see a basketball team that was being played in a town called Chico. Which wasn't, you know, too far away. It was like 40, 50 miles from where these guys were from. So Jack, being the wheelman, Jack Madruga, you know, he decided, well, I'll take all the guys. You know, we'll all pile in my car, you know, in the old Montego, and we're going to head to Chico. We're going to take in this basketball game and have a great time, kind of thing. And of course, off they went. You know, the parents were concerned. The boys did this kind of thing all the time. And in fact, you know, that's something to be understood. When I say boys, I'm not trying to be disparaging towards these guys. This is a term of endearment that was actually used by their own parents. They called them the boys. And again, these guys being disabled, mentally disabled, they lived at home with their families. They lived at home with their parents. Gary Mathias and all of the guys. Again, they all piled into Jack's Montego, and then they headed to Chico. We know that they made it to the game. They watched the game. There are reports from people in Chico that said that they saw them there. Then they left, or they headed north to Chico, and then they had to come south to come back home. So the other thing that we know is that they stopped at a gas station called Bear Gas Station, and they bought a bunch of snacks. And there's reports of this too. The gas station attendant said, yeah, I saw the boys. They came in here. And in fact, the reason he remembered them so much is that the game let out fairly late in Chico. So when they were on their way home and stopped at this gas station, he was just about to close up the gas station, and these 5 men come in and start buying stuff and, you know, laughing and having kind of a good time. And so the shopkeeper was actually kind of annoyed, which is why he remembered these guys so well. nobody really knows what happened after this. These guys certainly left Bear gas station and started heading back towards Chico, or at least left in the direction of Chico, but something happened along that path to where the boys never made it home. And by the next day, when the parents woke up and they went into their respective sons' rooms and saw that none of them had been home that night, of course, phone calls started being made. It's like, you know where Jack is? Hey, do you know where Ted is? And then nobody could say, no, we don't. We thought that maybe they stayed at Jack's house or Madruga, or Gary, and nobody knew where anybody was at. So then, of course, they got law enforcement involved. It was at this point in time and during this search that they actually ended up finding 75 miles away from where they should have been back at home, in a complete opposite direction of Chico, this was where they were found. Like I said, they were going north and south. Where they were found was like 75 miles east of where they should have been. Even heading from Chico to their hometown. So it was really strange. Now, this also equally strange is that this Montego was parked out in the middle of nowhere, down some gravel road. It makes no sense. And the sheriffs, when they found the car, they noticed a couple of very strange things. One, these guys had gone up in elevation from where they were. So they had actually headed into the mountains nearby. And so when they went up into the mountains, not only did they go up in elevation and down this gravel road that was just rutted and really difficult to travel on, they abandoned their vehicle when they did this, because there was no sign of these guys. Everybody was disappeared. Now, the one thing about the car, when they found the car, is that the snacks from the gas station had all been consumed. Like, there were wrappers and trash inside the car of the snacks that they had bought at Bear gas station. The other super strange about the car and the way in which the car was found, the sheriff said, is that one, the car still had a quarter tank of gas in it. And the other strange thing is that the car really didn't look like it should have for a vehicle that had traveled up a rutted and graveled road. There was no real dirt all over the vehicle. There was no real scratches all over the car or its hubcaps. There should have been, but there wasn't. I don't know. I don't know what that says. Maybe Jack loved his car. Jack Madruga loved that car. So who knows why they drove out into the middle of nowhere down this gravel path, but it is also safe to say that maybe Jack drove extremely slow down this gravel and rutted road to get to where he was. But regardless of why they were there or how the car got there in the first place or any of the above, the boys weren't with the car. It had been abandoned, and there was no sign of them. They looked and actually had tons of people. They actually spent over 6,000 hours of man-hours and hundreds of people looking in that area for these guys. Never found anything. And after about 3 weeks of looking, they called the search off. The sheriff's department called the search off and said, yeah, we can't find them. Plus, a giant snowstorm came in. So it actually made it quite impossible for them to search. Where they were looking after the snowfall, there was 5 to 15 foot drifts up in the mountains where these guys had abandoned their car. So the sheriff's department called off the search. Now, the families of these guys, to this very day, said that the sheriff's department didn't look hard enough for these guys, the boys. Families were just baffled by this. One, they said Jack would never take his car like that. Two, multiple parents of some of these guys said that their particular son, like Jack Hewitt and William Sterling, were afraid of the dark. They wouldn't have gotten out of a car in the middle of the woods in the mountains, 75 miles away from home, and walked off. It just doesn't make any sense, all right? And then, on top of all that, you got Jack Madruga as well, who was in the military, and Gary Mathias, who was in the military, all right? and a 32-year-old Ted Weir who actually holds down a job and you know, is higher functioning. I mean, none of these guys, first of all, should be understood. When I say they have mental disabilities of varied types, let's be very clear that none of these guys were so mentally disabled that their parents didn't feel comfortable letting them leave the house unattended. You know what I'm saying? These guys aren't like wearing helmets and bashing their heads up against the wall, just sitting there somewhere drooling all over themselves. And there's nothing wrong with people who are that disabled. I'm just saying that's not where these guys were. All right? They were high functioning. And so it's really inexplicable why these guys did what they did, and their families still maintain to this day that it makes no sense whatsoever. And I happen to agree with them. It makes no sense. But, guys, it gets stranger than that. Okay, it's more than just these guys driving off into the middle of nowhere and abandoning their car and disappearing forever. Oh, no, no, no. Because if the story just ended there, you go, yeah, you know what, Patrick, that's weird, but it ain't that weird. So, remember, this started on February the 24th of 1978, all right? In the middle of June, all right, let's fast forward a few months now. In the middle of June, some motorcyclists who were like doing a mountain tour kind of thing, and they went off this gravel road. They got off to take a rest. They found, as they're hiking and just resting and whatnot, when they pull their bikes off the road, they actually find they see an old like RV, like a cabin kind of thing. You know, from the reports I've read, you know, I've read a couple of things now that have varied reports. Some say it was a state-maintained cabin by the Forest Service, and I've heard other people say it was like a little camper. And what I think it was is that it's a mixture of both. It was a camper put out in the woods by the Forest Service for rangers. There it was. And when these motorcyclists found it, they were like, "Oh, that's cool. Let's go look at it." You know, and who wouldn't? Let's go explore. And so as they went and started exploring and looking, they opened the camper. They were hit with a horrible smell, clearly of death. They closed the camper door, and when they peered through the windows now, they could see what looked to be a man laying very still on a bed in the camper. So they went and immediately got law enforcement. Now, law enforcement came in, and sure enough, when they went inside the camper, there was, in fact, a deceased man inside the camper. And sadly, it was Ted Weir. But this is where it gets even stranger, and it's just going to keep getting stranger. But Ted Weir was under 5 blankets, okay, as if he had been tucked in. There was a candle sitting on the desk beside him, or on the night table beside the bed in this camper. And he had no shoes on. His pants that he was wearing were actually rolled up to his knees. And his feet were just horribly gangrene. I mean, he had been dead for a little while, but he had clearly sustained frostbite of some kind on his feet. But his shoes were nowhere to be found. So as they now are identifying this as Ted Weir, they also understand that Ted's got a beard now. And he didn't have a beard when he disappeared, which states that Ted was probably from his beard growth and other things, and I'll get to that in a second, but his beard growth alone dictated that he had probably been out in the woods for about 13 weeks. Now remember, the sheriff's department called off the search after 3 weeks, guys. The other thing about Ted Weir is that Ted had lost like 80 pounds. It's so strange, okay? But here's the other thing. This trailer, this camper, had a propane heater, had multiple blankets, had extra winter clothes inside of it, the whole shebang. So why he was covered in 5 blankets and why he had no shoes on and had frostbite all over his feet is a truly baffling mystery. They started searching around this camper, and also what the National Park Service had done was put these containers there that had food in it, and actually had a year's worth of food there. One of the containers had been broken open, and it looked like the boys had eaten like 30 cans of food while they were there. But there was no sign of any of the other boys. It was just Ted Weir under 5 blankets, his pants rolled up to his knees, and dead. Who knows, guys? As they continued to search in a perimeter, you know, widening their perimeter and looking for signs of the other 4 boys, because remember, there's 5, and now they found Ted Weir. As they search and widen their perimeter of search for these boys, eventually about 11 miles away from where the car was found, they found William Sterling's body and Jack Madruga's body. Now understand the distance here. The camper, which I don't think I told you, the camper that they found Ted Weir's body in was about 20 miles away from where Jack Madruga's car was found back in February when the search was initially started. So, it appears that for whatever reason in the middle of the night, these 5 guys now got out of their vehicle on this road 75 miles away from where they should have been, then walked at least 20 miles to get to this cabin in the middle of the night, right, pitch black, or over a course of a couple of days. But these guys were scared of the dark. It's really strange. And then at this camper, you find 30 cans of food being gone, but Ted Weir when he died, had lost 80 pounds of his weight, of his original weight when he went missing. So he was clearly starving. But they had a year's worth of food there. And then 11 miles away from where the car was originally found, you have William Sterling's body and Jack Madruga's body. Again, there were signs of animal predation on the bodies post-mortem. So post-death, the animals had come in and really had a go at William Sterling's body and Jack Madruga's body, but they did identify them from the remains. Then back at the base camp, the camper, they're looking around it. And remember, they're spreading out. Well, Jack Hewitt's dad, because remember, as of right now, they have found Ted Weir's body in the camper, and now they have found William Sterling and Jack Madruga, who owned the car, who owned the Montego. They have found those 2 guys together 11 miles away from where the car originally was, or where it was found. Now, those guys weren't there originally because when they found the car, when the boys first went missing and they searched out, they most certainly searched in that area, that 11-mile radius area kind of thing, and there was no sign of them then. Get back to the camper, they're widening out their search, and they found 3 of the guys already, and Jack Hewitt's dad decides, well, I'm going to come and help with the search for my boy, all right? And in fact, his name was Jack Hewitt as well. So Jack Sr. came to look for Jack Jr. And a few miles away from the cabin where Ted Weir was found, Jack Hewitt's father actually finds his son's coat, his jacket, laying on the ground. And to his horror, when he picked up the jacket, his son's spine fell out of the jacket. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine. As a father myself, I can't imagine. But it's what happened. Not too far away from that, when the other searchers came, and I'm sure Mr. Hewitt was taken away. When the search continued, not too far away, they did find some more remains of Jack, his skull, his teeth. And so now they found 4 of the boys. Now they have found Jack Hewitt, all right, William Sterling, Jack Madruga, and Ted Weir. But there is no sign of Gary Mathias, all right? Now, here's another super strange fact, all right? Because I've waited to tell you this fact because I want to talk about Gary Mathias. Because he is the only person during this entire case, guys, that has never been found. Ever. All right? So, Gary Mathias, his shoes were actually found in the camper with Ted Weir. Remember, Ted Weir's shoes were never found. Ever. All right? Now, Gary Mathias. Again, Gary Mathias had paranoid schizophrenia. He was discharged from the Army because he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Gary had also made a few bad life choices after a time in the military. He got on serious drugs. I'm fairly certain it was in the range of heroin and LSD and cocaine, serious drugs. And he had been arrested for burglary and breaking and entering on more than one occasion. As well, he had almost been arrested, and I imagine they either talked him out of it or somehow his parents came and got him, but he was almost arrested twice for assault. And this, unfortunately, is not uncommon behavior for a paranoid schizophrenic, especially if they're not medicated and they don't keep up on their medications. They can really do a lot of harm, not only to themselves, but to other people. And it's a sad fact. So, Gary Mathias also, though, was institutionalized at one point in time. He was put inside of a mental facility, and in this mental institution, he escaped, according to reports. Now, I've looked, and I haven't found any newspaper articles or anything. This is, to me, completely hearsay. All right, because that's what it is. I've only heard this in stories being told, and some people tell it when they tell this case story, and other people do not. It's in some books, it's not in others. But from some reports, Gary Mathias, while at this mental hospital, escaped and then walked 500 miles to get home. I don't know. But if a man is capable of doing that, then one could say walking 20 miles in the middle of the night is probably not going to be a big stretch for him. But the weird thing is, why is his shoes inside the cabin? Or the little camper where Ted Weir was found? I don't know. To this day, again, this case remains completely open as far as to the mysteries of what happened to these guys. Guys, on this channel, I generally leave my opinions out of things. I don't add my opinion to what I think happened, because I often believe that when people tell these cases, any mystery case, and they start adding their own, I don't want to sway anybody to my line of thinking. But in this case particular, guys, I am going to put my 2 cents worth in the pot here. I personally believe Gary Mathias had some sort of psychotic episode. He could have very well been armed, and these guys didn't know about it, and he could have forced them at gunpoint or knife point to drive out to the middle of nowhere, then walk miles, into the woods. Now, here's the thing. Ted Weir was kind of a big guy, right? And Gary Mathias was in the military. He went to basic training. He understands some things. He spent some time in the service. And, if you are intimidated by somebody, or if you want to make somebody a little bit more uncomfortable, you make them take their shoes off. And Ted Weir's shoes were never found. Remember that, all right? I think that Gary Mathias, for whatever reason, again, the guy's paranoid schizophrenic. So if you're looking for something to make sense when you're dealing with a big bucket of crazy, you're going to be disappointed, because there's nothing to make sense here of. But in his mind, I personally believe, for whatever reason, he took Ted Weir's shoes and put them on, and then made Ted walk barefoot for 20 miles. And I think this is how Ted Weir ended up with frostbite all over his feet. Upon getting to the cabin, I think that Gary Mathias then left the 4 men there out in the middle of the wilderness and walked off into the wilderness himself. Unfortunately, I think that this time, though, however, he wasn't capable of walking 500 miles this time, and he most likely died of exposure in the snowstorm that hit 3 weeks after they went missing. I think Gary's probably, his bones are probably up in those mountains somewhere. I think that, though, these 4 men that were left at the camper had decisions to make. Remember, Jack Hewitt was found very near the cabin where Ted was found. And that's important, because I think Ted Weir, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, was like a big brother to Jack Hewitt. And I don't think Jack Hewitt would have left Ted Weir if he was in a sick and hurt state. And clearly he was. He was under 5 blankets. He had gangrene and blood. He most likely, according to the coroner report, Ted Weir died of blood poisoning due to gangrene and wounds on his legs from the frostbite. So what I think happened is that Gary Mathias forced Ted to walk barefoot with all the guys to this cabin. Then Ted was super hurt. Jack decided to stay with him. Gary Mathias ran off into the woods with Ted's shoes, hence why Ted's shoes were never found. Gary Mathias left his shoes there. Ted couldn't put them on his feet because they were too small for him. Then the other 2 men, Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga, said, "We're going to go get help." And they walked off into the wilderness, but unfortunately, because of the 5 to 15 foot snow drifts and the snow and the bitter cold, they died of hypothermia and exposure. And then animals came in and scavenged their remains. And then at last, last straw, Jack Hewitt, probably starving at this point in time, confused. Remember, Jack Hewitt had an anxiety disorder of some type to where he wouldn't even make phone calls because it was so scary for him. I imagine that this guy was probably having some sort of breakdown himself. He attempted to walk and go get help, but only made it like 2 miles away from the cabin, and where he most likely just sat down scared in pitch black woods and sat there until he died of hypothermia and exposure himself, and was also then scavenged by animals. That's my personal opinion of what I think happened. I personally believe Gary Mathias is responsible for what occurred to the Yuba County 5. But that's just my personal opinion, all right? But there you go. I'd love to hear what you think about this, guys. The Yuba County 5, the American Diavolo Pass. What made these guys go do what they did? What happened? I'd love to hear your opinion on it, so leave me something in the comment section below. And guys, if you've been here this long, I surely hope you'll consider subscribing. Keep coming back, smashing that subscribe button, guys. I can't grow without you. I desperately need your help. So if you like this video, hit that jolly candy like button. And no matter what, whether you're a new subscriber or an old subscriber, click that bell. Get the notifications. Keep coming back so you don't miss out on the next video. Don't let the YouTube algorithm decide your fate. Take fate into your own hands. Hit the bell. That way you know when videos come out. You can choose to watch them or maybe choose not to, but it's your choice. And that's the most important thing. But that's it for Patrick today, guys. I am going to go and frolic and be merry. But I will see you guys in the next video.